Hey folks, thanks for joining me for this episode from the Embellish Pod. If you got here by chance, please take a moment to hit the subscribe button. Hopefully I can be found on any podcasting platform that exists. And if you can't find me on a platform, send me an email at embellishpod@gmail.com and I'll try to get that taken care of. You can also find video versions of this podcast on YouTube. You can find all of my links on Instagram at embellishpod or TikTok with the same handle. I have a website. It is www.embellishpod.com. It's a place to pick up these links, episode details, and more. Today, we're going to have Jeremy joining us from CaskX. I really hope you guys enjoy this conversation. That's a little bit different than what we normally do here, but for some of you, it may give you an opportunity to participate in the process, but for others of you, you can see some of the things that are happening in the back end of the industry that are helping drive our segment, the thing that we're all emotionally invested in, forward in a really, really meaningful way. So I hope you guys enjoy today's episode. All right, this morning or afternoon or whenever you happen to be watching or consuming this, I have Jeremy Kasler joining me from CaskX, and Jeremy and I had tried to have a chance to have a conversation during the Kentucky Bourbon Festival in their media tent, and that ultimately didn't work out. It was a noisy environment, as media people often are, and I didn't want to waste your time and wanted to make sure that we didn't, record something that we couldn't then subsequently use. And you gracefully rescheduled, and we made this happen again. So Jeremy, tell me a little bit about yourself, right? So let's hear about Jeremy, and then we'll talk about CaskX as well.
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me on the show, John. It's a real pleasure. My name's Jeremy Kasler. You might have guessed from my accent, I was born in England. I've lived and worked all over the world, diverse places such as Russia, Hong Kong, Singapore, Australia, so on and so forth. I'm now settled and happily married in Los Angeles, and enjoying the lifestyle here, and obviously running CaskX and expanding the business.
Yeah, so CaskX, and I'm gonna struggle with that all day long because I've got a slightly southern Western Kentucky drawl that likes to run all the words together. But CaskX lives in the world of like tangible asset diversification, right? That's the thing that I came across. It's the word of the day for me today. Is that tell me a little bit about what CaskX is and what they're doing, or what you guys are doing, I guess.
Yeah, so CaskX allows investors to invest into new fill barrels of bourbon. So we create a situation where we will go out to a distillery, we'll purchase, for example, say 1,000 barrels, and then we'll sell those barrels in smaller quantities to private individuals. The individuals have to be accredited investors in order to invest, but we will then help to manage and store the barrels for up to 8 years. So included within the price of the investment is 8 years of storage, insurance, and taxes, which are paid in Kentucky. So it's, as you say, it's a tangible investment. It's something that's obviously real, but it's something that doesn't require the investor to be too much involved in terms of the management. They put the money in, and obviously the asset ages over a period of time.
So you said in there, there's a couple things, and like I said, most of my questions end up coming from what you say as opposed to what I wrote before we ever even started. But in there you mentioned that it goes up to 8 years. Now, is that the cap for aging, or is that just the cap for the initial investment goes to 8 years? And if you were an investor and you said, I want to run this to 15 years, is that an option, or is that just,
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Legally, you have to hold the barrels for 1 year. So we are governed by the SEC because it's considered a security. Now, we include the 8 years because we feel that somewhere between 6 and 8 years is the optimum time to trade out the barrels in terms of return on investment. The market has changed even over the last few years, where it tends to be following the Scotch market, where people more and more are looking at age statements. Previously, a lot of bourbon that you drank off the shelves might be 2, 3, 4 years old, but now brands are becoming more kind of selective, and they like to point out the point of differences as there's more competition, you could say. So that's very much in the consumer's favour because the quality is improving. But we feel 8 years is a reasonable time in order for our clients to make money. Now, the client has the choice. The client can sell after 1 year, 4 years, 8 years, or he can continue to store the barrels at his own cost after 8 years. But we feel that's 8 years is a good window of opportunity.
So how did this even become a thing, right? Like, so, the barrel brokers are not anything new necessarily, right? People being able to buy and sell barrels, but treating this as more of an investment than it is a quick swap game, right? Because most barrel brokers, they get a barrel and their goal is to move it as quickly as they possibly can to someone else, so you don't hold on to physical inventory and then worry about the taxes or the loss or all of these different things. Like, how did CaskX even become an idea?
Well, I think there's two parts to it. I think it's worth pointing out that people within the industry in the US, in Kentucky and Tennessee primarily, have been investing into barrels for decades. So people with the contacts and the wherewithal were able to buy 50 barrels or 100 barrels that might be part of an excess of the production, so on and so forth. They've laid those barrels down and they've been able to sell them through their contacts within the industry. This option wasn't available to the general public. The idea came from the fact that in Europe and the UK in particular, people have been investing into barrels of Scotch for hundreds of years. Again, but as a retail investor over the last sort of 10 or 15 years, and a lot of companies have opened up there following the same business model as CaskX, where they buy a number of barrels, sell smaller amounts to investors, and help them to manage it. So we've seen bourbon following a very similar trajectory to Scotch, and the Scotch investment market has been booming for the last 10 years. You could almost pick any distillery, buy barrels of Scotch, lay them down and make money. It's a bit like in certain property markets where you don't need to be an expert. You just go, right, this market's booming. I'll buy an apartment or a house, safe the knowledge that you're going to make money. So we've essentially copied something that's very successful with a slightly different product, bourbon instead of Scotch, but with exactly the same dynamics. So we've seen, again, over the last few years, there's a so-called bourbon boom, which we can go into more detail a little bit later if you like. But yeah, the idea came about because we copied a very successful business model from the UK and Europe.
So how does a person go? They visit the CaskX website. They put in their information and say, I'm interested in investing in barrels. How do they go from a contact to an activation or an investor?
Sure. So initially they'll reach out via the website or via our marketing or events. We did at the Bourbon Festival a couple of weeks ago, as you probably saw. We will obviously connect with them directly. One of our brokers will be allocated to that particular investor. We'll then talk about the type of investment and what's behind it, and it's not dissimilar to investing in stocks or shares. We'll talk about the dynamics of the market, of course, in general, but then we'll get down to the specifics of the distillery. The reason we work with certain distilleries and not others is essentially the people behind it. Some people could say, well, all bourbon's all the same. Well, obviously it's not. But what makes a brilliant bourbon from an average bourbon is the people that are making it. So in the same way that you might buy a stock or a share because the CEO is a genius, or you can see the management team are doing brilliant things, we take that same approach to the investment. So we'll talk about the market in general, the demand, the supply, the international side to it. Then we'll get down into the specifics of the distillery that we're suggesting itself and talk about the people behind it. And then, of course, we talk about budget, what's a good amount to invest. And then, of course, once we've got that agreement, we'll do the paperwork, and yeah, we move forward from there.
And I can imagine in the world of a tangible asset that you can invest in, there's a degree of romanticism that's involved in bourbon here, right? It's gold maybe had that kind of concept 20 years ago, and it still feels nice to kind of lay your hands on an item. But so an investor, they seek you guys out, they enroll in the program. How do you go about purchasing barrels? Or are you facilitating the relationship where the investor does that, or you buy on their behalf? Like, how does that function?
No, we've built relationships throughout Kentucky, Tennessee, all of the US with distilleries. Again, we do our due diligence. We look at 100 distilleries, and we might eventually select 2 or 3 that we feel offer the best investment potential, and we have those really great relationships. Again, it's slightly different from Scotch, and we have sold Scotch previously. Whereas with Scotch, there's often no direct relationship with the distillery. You're dealing through almost generational relationships. Mm-hmm. Whereas in Kentucky and Tennessee, the people who are running the distilleries and the owners and the master distillers, they're friends. So we've got this wonderful relationship. We'll go out, we'll buy 1,000, 2,000 barrels, and then we will sell those barrels in smaller quantities, 50 here, 100 here, to our investors.
Mm-hmm. And so, an investor comes in, you acquire barrels that, subsequently belong to them, in a roundabout way. I assume it's similar to, I'll go back to this, like a, gold investment, where you can buy the tangible gold and have it shipped to you, and you can store it locally, or you have, accredited, licensed, and bonded intermediaries that'll hold on to it on your behalf, and then you can sell it later on. Whenever the owner of the barrel decides that they want to sell a barrel, 5 barrels, whatever, does it get sold back to a brand, or can it be sold from one investor to another? Like, how does that relationship work?
Yeah, so there's a number of options, and of course the investor owns the barrels, so he decides what he wants to do. He could even bottle it himself. So he can make his own brand if he wishes to. But generally speaking, the investor will reach back to us. We are happy to assist with the sale. Of course, we take a 5% trading fee to assist with that. And generally, the barrels, let's say they're 4, 6, or 8 years old, they're going into a brand. Mm-hmm. It's not a good time to buy an 8-year-old bourbon barrel. It's probably not a good time to buy for investment. Mm-hmm. The best time to buy is new make, because you're selling at much lower, entry level. So a lot of the bottles you see on the liquor store when you go in there, a lot of them don't actually produce bourbon per se. A lot of them buy aged barrels in, and they bottle it the next day for economic reasons, because not many people want to wait 8 years to get paid on their hard work. So for that reason, there is a huge demand for well-aged, good provenance, and by provenance I mean correctly stored in the right location, good quality, good branded bourbon. So yeah, we of course we can help with that. We've got contacts, not just in America but throughout the world, who are looking for aged bourbon. I think that the percentage of barrels 8 years and above in Kentucky is something like 2 or 3%.
Right.
Not many barrels get to that age. So if you're holding barrels of that age, you're holding something that's very tradable, let's say.
And this the entire. Somebody might ask, are you a little bit clairvoyant here, right? Because the entire concept of what you're doing makes sense today, right? In 2024, if I look at in the last 4 years, we've seen, West Kentucky Distilling has opened with almost explicit contract or custom distillation, very little brand, individual brand development. Whiskey House, that's all they're doing. Jackson Purchase, that's all they're doing. Bardstown Bourbon Company in Green River, 75 to 80% of their production is for other brands, right? Whereas in 20 15, 16, 17 probably wasn't nearly as much of that because there weren't brands explicitly focused on that. A lot of the barrel market was heritage distilleries had these extra barrels that they just didn't really want to use for their own blends, or they wanted to make some money off of them, whatever. That's where it was. Are you, how did you identify that this was a thing that like you're going to have a significant amount of stock available to you to manage this investment relationship?
I mean, that's a good question, and the fact is that there's no guarantees going forward, but where the market's at, or
Mm-hmm.
how many different distilleries will be involved. But I think one of the important factors is that there's a reason why there's so many new distilleries that are producing bourbon, and that's based on demand.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, if you go back, like you say, 8 or 10 years, the demand was very different to what it is today. And one of the important factors is that a lot of the bigger distilleries, and I'll cite an example, say Wilderness Trail, for example, has been bought by Campari. Now, Campari hasn't bought Wilderness Trail in order to sell bourbon into the US market. They've bought Wilderness Trail to sell it globally. And if you consider that the market in the US is, 350 million, but the market globally is 8 billion, there's your answer to why a lot of distilleries are ramping up production. They obviously do their due diligence. They're not spending, each rickhouse costs $5-6 million, never mind the machinery involved. So a lot of the investment is based on what much cleverer people than me are saying, that we need to start ramping up because the demand is getting bigger. The international demand is very, very important. It's not always something that people in America, can see because it's such a great market here. But if you consider that, every day in China, there's another, million new people coming into the market. India's become a huge market. There's bourbon bars opening up in Europe, Asia, where people are going in and all they're drinking is bourbon. There's nothing else available to them. So the bourbon boom is a real thing. You've only got to go to Kentucky and see all the cranes and all the building work going on. And we strongly believe, along with much cleverer people than me, that the boom is set to continue for at least the next 10, 12, 15 years.
And that makes a ton of sense, right? The bourbon boom happened domestically, for the last handful of years. I always sort of chuckle whenever you have brands that are touting, we're the number one worldwide bourbon or whatever, and oftentimes it's ignoring what might be sold in India or China, right? Just because population wise, we're 350 million people in the United States, and there's a couple billion in India alone, or something like that. And you mentioned the global export market, and I poked around on your website, looked at some of your documentation that exists, and one of the things that I found that was interesting, and this is more of a question that I don't know if you can answer or not, but the exports of Kentucky whiskey to Europe was on a pretty steady rise up until 2020. And then you see this really, really hard drop that happens in 2020. And my first reaction, because I'd forgotten what happened then, I was like, oh, that's COVID, 100% COVID. But it's not. It was a tariff, right? There was a tariff that was put in on American whiskey going to Europe. But the tariff's been lifted, but the export market to Europe hasn't recovered back to where it was. Do you think that market will grow kind of in a more linear fashion as it recovers, or is it going to hit another spurt where it's going to jump up?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, and I've got some of the answers, but not all of them. What happened was, yeah, you're exactly right. The tariffs came into play, and tariffs come and go. Over the last 100 years, there's been tariffs on steel, and there isn't. There's tariffs on corn. It's an ever shifting sands, and different countries have different tariffs. You've got China, Russia, Brazil, God knows where else. But what happened was, and this was in some ways a positive thing, because the tariffs came in Europe, and of course everyone in the bourbon industry is right. This is more difficult now. They're not buying as much bourbon, so a lot of the focus went into other areas like Asia, South America, Australasia. I think Australia might be the second biggest importer of American whiskey. As far as I think the last time I looked at it, anyway, and it's only
It is according to the documentation you guys have in that little
okay.
investor sheet that you can supply. Because that
Yeah,
was one of the other questions. Like Australia is really big on Kentucky whiskey right now, which is a thing that I wasn't aware of.
I'm actually half Australian, and I can
Mhm.
verify that they like a drink. So I'm
Yeah.
not surprised at all. Nothing much happens after Friday lunchtime in any of the
Mhm.
office spaces. But what's happened is that, of course, when one market has declined or they're buying less, of course they're looking at other markets. So
Mhm.
in some ways, it's been a good thing because the focus has been right. Let's really have this push into Asia. Let's have this push into South America, Australasia. And now, as the tariffs have been removed, the market now is creeping back up again. So we're in a better place now than we were before. Let's put it that way.
Mhm. Yeah, and it definitely you can see that we get really myopic. North American citizens of the United States, we really only look at our own domestic market and say, oh, there's a bubble that's about to burst. But I think the bubble that bursts is just the United States market bubble. As it starts to soften, the rest of the world is just now starting to be introduced into the variation, right? Because prior to the bourbon boom, it was a handful of heritage brands that were going globally, right? And people globally want to try new things on a regular basis. Oh, there's a new idea, there's a new flavor profile, there's new whatever else. The rise and growth of craft distillers and then smaller brands that become larger brands. Wilderness Trail is a prime example that
Mm.
they were on the craft trail 5 years ago, and now they're on the heritage trail now because of their size and volume. And this was, prior to the Campari purchase, they were on their way to do that on their own. As these brands mature, they hit global markets. The rest of the world wants these things too, in the same way that we want the things that they're making, right? That's why I think that you see like, Japanese whiskey and Indian whiskey will grow in the United States in the next 5 years because these are brand new things for us to think about now.
No, no, definitely. If you can afford Japanese whiskey, by the way, because it's around the sort of
Right.
better.
I have a friend who sent me samples. That's how I can afford it, right? I
Oh
have
gosh.
people that know how to do that. But
What,
we'll go backwards a little bit as you start to, as you guys purchase barrels. How do you identify people that you're going to partner with to do these purchases of barrels, like the distilleries that are making them?
I think, as I referred to previously, we treat this in a very obviously business-like fashion, and we treat it not dissimilar to how a stockbroker might identify a stock or a share that he feels is worth, his clients investing in. Uh, we of course we look at the quite often the branding of the business. So if it's a contract distiller, who do they currently supply? Are they supplying brands that are very popular and growing in popularity? Uh, if it's just a regular distillery that happens to offer some barrels for contract distilling, how strong is their brand? We look at the potential growth of the business. Is it a craft distiller and that's where they're going to stay and that's got its own story,
Mhm.
or is it a company like Bardstown that have huge ambitions and are
Mhm.
brilliantly run, so on and so forth. So there's a number of factors go into it. I guess the important one as well: will they sell us barrels? Because
Right.
it's not just a matter of going out and buying what you want. Uh,
Mhm.
it's quite often you have to kind of, I'm not saying beg for an allocation, but you have to put a lot of effort in to be able to get onto the allocation list. So we can often, with certain offerings, sell much more than we can get. So in some sense, that's a good situation because that shows even for our own client base, the demand is more than the supply, as it were.
So you mentioned this a little bit earlier. An individual investor owns a barrel. They have to own it for a year due to SEC regulations before they're allowed to do anything with it at this point. Or I think that's maybe a fair paraphrasing of what you said.
Mm.
If it's not, tell me if I'm wrong, because SEC is scary for sure. Um, so after that year is up, they can do anything that they want to with it, right? And you said they could bottle their own. Like, what does that look like? Because the idea of an individual bottling their own, it feels really, really exciting and romantic for the people who want to do those types of things. But it also seems like it would be a huge headache to try to pull off.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, the barrels that we're selling, we're not recommending that our clients bottle them. There are other areas where they're probably set up in some ways in a better way specifically for that purpose, but it's not such a complicated process. The complications arrive, and I'll be careful how I say this in terms of shipping. So the actual bottling process is fairly straightforward. We get a barrel. We bottled a couple of barrels last month for the Bardstown Bourbon Festival specifically, and the actual process is pretty simple. You buy the bottles, you organise a label, you fill it up, you pay the tax on it in Kentucky. The more complicated factors, if you want to ship your bottles from Kentucky to where you live, and that's not something we intentionally want to get too involved in. So I would say 99% of our clients are buying in order to trade the barrels. But of course, you've got the option. If you bought 100 barrels, you may well keep one barrel back, take the profit on the 99, and create your own wonderful brand with your wife's name on it or your kid's name on it, whatever.
And I'll say that the first time, I don't remember if you guys were at the festival 3 years ago, but I know you were last year and this year, right?
Yes.
And the first time I saw last year at the festival was the first time I'd ever seen the brand, right? Because I haven't been in the I have enough money to invest in barrels market. And I was like, this is a curious group to be here. But then as I started thinking about like what the Venn diagram of people who go to Kentucky Bourbon Festival and have a disposable income looks like, as well as the people who want to invest to make money, that Venn diagram looks more like a circle, right? Because a lot of those people want the exact same things. The people with disposable incomes also invest, but I assume that there's a minimum threshold that a person has to cross to be a part of this. Like I can't show up to you and say, I've got $100. I'd like to invest in a fractional portion of a barrel. I have to have more than that, right?
Yeah. So the minimum amount of barrels you can buy is 24 barrels. Now, most of our clients come in, around about let's say 80 to 100 barrel mark. But of course, once you've invested, of course, you can invest again. So most of our clients have like a portfolio. So they'll have some from Bardstown, some from Jackson Purchase, some from Green River, so on and so forth. But the minimum investment will be around about $56,000, something like this. And all the investors are or have to be accredited investors. It means that they've got a certain income.
So what does accredited mean, right? I assume there's more than just income in an accredited investor, or is it just income?
Is someone who earns a minimum of $200,000 a year, or $300,000 if they're married as a household, or has $1 million in assets, not including the family home. So it gives, it's put in place to give the investor kind of almost a sort of a mutual level of protection in that we're generally dealing with people who've got other investments and they understand the investment process, and it's not somebody who's put their last $500 into something and hoping it's going to go well.
Yeah, you get away from the Robin Hood traders and you get into the wealth managers, right? The folks, and there's nothing wrong with Robin Hood. I've got Robin Hood. Everybody, you put an extra couple $100 in Robin Hood a month, and at the end of the year, you got some degree of an investment. It's not the same concept. So these folks are carrying these portfolios of barrels. Do they manage that themselves, or do you manage their portfolio and you tell them this is what you've got in your stocks, and here's your prospectus for selling, and like how does that look?
So we manage everything. We provide, apart from the obvious paperwork to prove that they own the barrels. We also provide a username and a login so they can access at any time, just like a stock or share. Again, you can see your portfolio, see when you bought it, what price you bought it at. We also provide a third-party audit, if you like, that's done by an audit company will go and literally head count the barrels, make sure that all the barrels belonging to, Mr. Jones are in place. And just as importantly, the barrels are stored at a federally bonded warehouse. Now, that means the federal government is keeping a very close eye on those barrels as well, because they want to get their tax on it. So we almost have this another level of even greater security for the investors. And if you want someone keeping an eye on things, the federal government's probably one of the good people to have. So, sorry, they also got, we provide certificates of ownership as well, which are the, again, not just the receipt or the invoice, but an actual, certificate for each barrel with a barrel number, mash bill, char level, all the details on the barrel itself.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're looking at a minimum of 24 barrels for any number of investors that are already participating in this. And those barrels could be spread out across multiple distilleries and multiple locations and different rick houses and different storages. Like, how do you guys track that? Like, I'm thinking about it as in my real day job, I work as a digital product manager for software. And so I started thinking about, like, what does the infrastructure of a tool look like to manage that kind of inventory that is so geographically disparate and interspersed even inside of its own location? Like, how do you manage that?
Yeah, no, again, great question. I mean, obviously we have a back office team here. Part of that back office team, all it does is focus on the management of the barrels. So we've got, I think, currently around about 30,000 barrels under our control, let's say. And you're right, they're spread all over the US, but mainly in Kentucky and Tennessee. And we have, people whose full-time job it is to track, monitor. Of course, we work very closely with the distilleries themselves, because, again, it's a federally bonded warehouse, so they have to have very accurate reports on what it is, where it is, so on and so forth. So yeah, it's like any business that's carrying stock in multiple locations. There's, I don't quite get it myself, but there's software programs and people, right. And like I say, actual real people with real eyes who go down there and literally do a head count as a backup to all the tech side of it.
It's it's got to be a monumental task for sure. That I think that I've also heard that the investors, the people who have these barrels, have the opportunity to go taste these barrels. Is that a thing that can happen? Like, how does that happen?
Yeah, no, something we kind of developed and we're very proud of, and it's one of the best parts of the business, is that any investor who's invested with us has the opportunity to go on a VIP tour. So we invite them along with their spouse or their friend, whoever it might be, to the distillery. They can meet the team. They meet these really, really lovely, amazing geniuses who putting these bourbons together. They stir the corn. They can taste some of the age samples. Generally speaking, as it's new make, they can try their own bourbon, but it's not going to taste too good at this stage.
Right.
But they really feel part of the process, and kind of on an emotional level, it brings an emotional dividend as well as a financial dividend, because prior to that, it's kind of just talk. We've spoken to them, we've sent them lovely photos, they look at the website. It never quite feels real. For most of them, they've maybe never been to a distillery before. So when they actually come and see their barrels and see the distillery and really feel part of the process, it does create, again, not just a financial dividend, but an emotional dividend as well. And as you can imagine, the vast majority of our investors are bourbon lovers as well, so that obviously helps.
Do you think that and this is, I don't know, this is maybe an arbitrary question, do you think that the emotional investment, that emotional connection to the thing that they've purchased, helps to keep them from making short-sighted decisions, right? Because you have to keep it for a year. You could sell it at 1 year, but that's not a great time to sell whiskey that's been in a barrel at all, right? And your advisement is up to 8 years. Your good range is 5 to 7, maybe 8, depending upon what you've got there. But do you think that helps with it, or you think this is just a fun thing that helps them feel attached to what they bought?
I think for most of our investors, they come in with maybe an emotional point of view. I love bourbon. I love drinking Bardstown. This would be great as something to invest in. So we don't have to do much work on that side. They're all kind of already sold on the emotional benefits of investing into something that you love. So we try and stick to the real business side of it. Look, let's just talk about why it's a good investment.
Mm-hmm.
And passion investments, which is what this is becoming more of a thing. People are investing into cars and violins and all sorts of really bizarre assets.
Mm-hmm.
And remember that bourbon itself, regardless of the market, is one of the very few assets, and we'll call it an asset for our purpose,
Mm-hmm.
that increases in value regardless of market conditions. So if there's the same demand and supply is around in 8 years as there is today, that asset is more valuable because every day it gets a tiny bit more valuable. So every time you go to sleep, you'll wake up in the morning and the bourbon's worth a little bit more. So that's one of the really important factors. It's the money making, the fact that it's something real, it's liquid, it's wood, it's not going to disappear overnight. We can guarantee that people are going to be drinking bourbon in 8 years' time.
Mm-hmm. At least globally, right? There could be some stupid regressive prohibition type movement. I think we learned our lesson the first time, but you never know. I mean, Americans can be dumb. We've been known to make some bad decisions, but the rest of the world is still, and that's what kept a lot of those industries afloat, even during the lean years, was the global marketplace. Japan kept a lot of bourbon makers alive in the 70s and 80s, for sure, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. And again, it gets back to the fact that it's almost like asset preservation or wealth preservation, where it's not a Bitcoin or even a stock or a share that could become valueless overnight. There is that potential. This is something that has an intrinsic value, and it's not just the value is not just decided by market conditions, but it is something that 8-year bourbon is always more valuable than 1-year-old bourbon. So people like the experience and the journey of holding on to their bourbon. I mean, I think our oldest barrels in storage now are about 3.5 years old. Mm-hmm. Not one person has asked to sell yet because, unless you're getting divorced or you're desperate for money or, there's some financial trauma. People understand and enjoy the process of investing into something that's aging slowly and surely. And there has been 1 or 2 attempts to fast track the aging process that hasn't worked out too well. So until that happens, which it probably won't, it will be deemed a good investment.
Yeah, and most of those things are. I don't think that they're very successful at creating alternative aging methods. It's never fast tracking what Mother Nature can do over time. What I guess you can't really speak to what the future looks like, but if you look at those ones that are 3.5 years old, I assume there's some degree of valuation that happens from the day it went into the barrel to day 3.5 years. Sure. What does that growth look like percentage wise, or can you even say that?
Yeah, I mean, we normally, again, we want to sort of we don't want to create too many great expectations, right, or say to people, right, you're going to make a fortune. But generally speaking, if we talk about maybe a 10 to 12% growth per annum, I think we're very much, under promising and over delivering. And again, when it gets to the end of the cycle, the idea is that, as far as we're concerned, trade out your barrels, make lots of money, and go again. So right, again, if we're not going to create unrealistic expectations, then people will reinvest, and that's the plan.
Yeah, and 10 to 12% sounds per annum sounds great. in just about any market, right? Like you can trust your general fund indexes to get you 7, 8, maybe 9% a year. That would outperform that if you habitually did 10 to 12%. Markets are markets; they go up, they go down. The only thing that really matters is what you paid the day that you bought it and what you sell it for at the very end, right? It's like a boat. you know,
Yeah. Oh God, no, please don't compare this to a boat.
no. I mean, like, not the journey in between is far better for this
Yeah.
particular entity than something like a boat. That's fair. That was a wrong characterization. I shouldn't have done that. So given that this is, you're involving the SEC and you're doing investing, um, do, do you guys think that there's an opportunity to start looking into enabling people to, effectively look at this as a retirement investment concept? Is there an ability to play in a 401k realm? And I feel like probably not, given there's a physical product and a whole bunch of things, but is this a possibility?
No, to answer that, yeah, so there is a fund that was set up by CaskX. It's called the American Whiskey Fund, and it's
Mm-hmm.
for SEC purposes. It's a completely separate entity. We have to be careful how we word this, but
Right.
CaskX is the manager of the fund,
Mm-hmm.
and the fund it's only a small fund currently, and it was only recently brought out. But that allows investors to invest into an LLC and to use
Mm-hmm.
their 401k or their IRA. So, in answer, yeah, it is possible, and we are currently doing it. Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, that I was gonna say that's probably a really good way to protect the barrels from being sold before they're ready to be sold, because you can't get access to the money anyways, at least not until you hit retirement age. Um,
Yeah.
so being that this is a physical product, right? There is a chance for loss, right? There have been rickhouse
Yeah.
collapses, there's been tornadoes, there's been fires. Um, what happens in this scenario where I've invested in, and then the rickhouse that my barrels are in it, collapse, God forbid?
No, of course it's a liquid that can explode, and there's
Right.
all sorts of dramas can happen. Just on that note, I always think it's quite amusing when you walk into a rick house with 30,000 barrels and there's a fire extinguisher like this big by the front door. It's like,
That fire extinguisher is for the person who sees it to use that to get out with. That is not to stop the fire. That's to give you a
yeah.
chance to make it out of the building.
But yeah, no, again, very relevant question. So all the barrels are insured. Now, the downside with that, I will say, is that we were unable to insure them on their value of what they might be in, say, 4, 6, or 8 years' time. So we insured them at replacement value.
Mhm.
So if the worst came to the worst, and all the safeties and measures these days are far more strict than they were 10 or 20 years ago. But the rick house blows up, 30,000 barrels go with it. Then we will replace those barrels for brand new make barrels and provide another 8 years storage and insurance. But it's not,
Mhm.
it's highly unlikely. Let's put it that
Right.
way. That's a kind of a worst case scenario.
Yeah. I mean, all you have to do is look at the news and see how many rick houses there are and how many times that actually happens. But it's a
Yeah.
physical product. These are possibilities that happen. So you're doing this with specifically Kentucky bourbon. Is there an interest or an expectation to potentially branch out and do this with other physical commodities, other spirits, or even bottled wine, because bottled wine appreciates in a similar fashion? Like,
Yeah.
are you guys thinking about that, or are you just sticking with what you've got right now?
No, very much. I mean, we've been ready to launch a little while now, but because we've been so tied up into what we're doing in bourbon, into launching a wine investment company, and that would be particularly Californian wines. Historically, without going into too much detail, but people have invested into French wines and Italian wines. All of a sudden, globally, and the main market again is London, interestingly, but people are now investing in a serious way into Californian wines. So I think we're well placed. First of all, the head office is in California, for one.
Right.
We've got a number of people who invested into a liquor, deem that a good investment. So I'm pretty sure that will be something that we can develop and will be very successful. We've looked at other spirits, and we've looked at tequila, where there's been a lot of talk about tequila investment. The problem we see with that is the aging process. Generally, it's a lot quicker with tequila. So in order to make money, you need time.
Right.
So the price that you can buy it for and sell it for really is not enough to justify a company of our type. Maybe if you flew to Mexico and bought 100 barrels and sold them 4 years later yourself, you can make money, but it wouldn't work through us. Rum is the other interesting spirit that we've looked at, because again, it ages in much the same way, actually longer than bourbon. It's very similar to Scotch. The only issue we see, and we've done our due diligence, is the fact that it has to be stored outside of the US.
Right.
And we love the fact that the bourbon we sell is in a federally bonded warehouse. As you can imagine, if it's stored in the places where rum's made, the restrictions and the compliance is not as great. Let's put it in a nice way. So I wouldn't feel comfortable having to manage something that was in, the Caribbean or certain areas, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and I mean, just if we think about environmental conditions at its best, right? A lot of these are very volatile weather-wise, right? Hurricanes happen on a regular basis, so your chance of loss is even more significantly higher. Like hurricanes for the state of Kentucky just result in a lot of rain, right? we don't regularly have that many tornadoes that rip through the state that cause these sort of problems. But if you're in Jamaica, you couple hurricanes 3 a year, you got some potential loss. Are there other slightly hard pivot, but are there other global markets that would support this, where you could set something similar up in another country that has the opportunity for investing and do this? There's Japanese whiskey, there's Australian single malt, there's all these other things that people are aging. Is this a thought process?
It is, but I think we could sell Japanese whiskey. The problem with that is it's so expensive. There's been talk of people selling new make Kurosawa. I've always trouble with the pronunciation. Which is historically a brilliant distillery that closed down, I think, about 25 years ago. It's been reopened in a different location with different people, different machinery, so on and so forth. And those barrels are selling for in excess of $100,000 for one barrel of new make. No, it's absolutely nuts. So I think in terms of, we don't need to spread ourselves too thin. We could sell Irish whiskey, we could sell Australian whiskey, so on and so forth. But I think the real market and the potential anyway, I believe, is in bourbon. I think we still sell Scotch, and Scotch is a kind of more interesting market in some ways because of the disparity in price between the distilleries. You've got Macallan that would sell for 20 times more than another really good distillery. But I think do one thing really well, I think is the secret to this. And rather than having barrels stored literally all over the globe, we're happy for now to have barrels stored in Scotland and in the US.
Yeah, I mean, definitely with Scotch, prestige is already baked into those brands, right? And so the prices are pretty set. And this we're pushing up on time, and I think we probably both have other things that we have to get to work wise. So you carry the ownership of the barrel, the end user, the investor, they end up selling it. It goes to somewhere else. They make a brand out of it themselves, or someone else makes brands out of it. Is there an opportunity to connect the seller of the barrels to the person who purchases it and then subsequently bottles it, so they can be like, hey, I'll get a bottle of one of my barrels that this particular brand used?
That's a very good point, and that's something I've considered. but that's, I mean, I think anything that adds to the emotional dividend we want to do. We appreciate that there's lots of places you can invest your money, but we're very lucky that we're able to offer something that people actually love. Nobody loves steel, but they might invest into the steel industry. But that was like, right. What's your passion? Steel. So anything that can increase that dividend for our investors, that's we're in, and we'll look at them. It's something that we'll implement. So that's a really good idea. I like it.
I've got one more. I've got one more idea, and then I'll finish with maybe another question. And you throw this away if you want to. There's several companies that do this already, right? They make watches out of wood, like original grain. Have you explored the idea of taking one of the empty barrels and then having custom watches made for your investors, and say, hey, if you want to spend X and such extra dollars, you'll get a watch made from your barrel staves?
I think that's a terrible idea.
Perfect. Exactly. It'd be super expensive to do. I'm aware of that.
I'm out. I'll put it to the board, but that's not
Right.
something we're considering currently. I'll be honest.
Right. Yeah. Because that's the watch people and bourbon people are really really close together, right? They share a lot of the same things. Same thing with wine people. And I've seen those be a thing. The wooden. They're upscale. They're not like a jangly wooden watch, but
yeah.
They're a lot nicer than that. But I think I really am interested in what you guys are doing, and specifically in the North American marketplace. Once again, being very very centric to my own nation, but the growth of things like independent bottlers, we call them NDPs right now, but they're getting closer and closer to the idea of independent bottlers, which have been in Ireland and Scotland for a long time, and most mature markets have that. As those start to pop up, as the people like Lost Lantern who really live that, the existence of a number of different barrels to be able to purchase from based off of what you guys are doing very, very specifically feeds that market really well, and it leads to a higher degree of creativity, right? So there's one huge benefit that comes out of this for me as a consumer. The second part is allowing people who are already huge fans in this segment to have some skin in the game, so to speak. A lot of us whiskey nerds sit around and talk about what we think should happen in the market. But folks who go through you guys now have the opportunity to participate in it in a way that usually would cost millions of dollars, right? Like, because we're at a place now, you want to build a distillery, you're a couple 5 million in for a small operation.
Yeah.
Right. For a very, very small operation. And if you want to, build a brand, it's maybe even more money, but it's giving people a chance to put their money into a thing that they're attached to, but also make money, right? Like that's the other part of it. Like this doesn't make sense if you're not making money, if the investor's not making money and the distillery's not making money. And then the last benefit, if I think about features and benefits situation here, there's a lot of distilleries that now have the opportunity to sell off stock very early on and make some money while they're trying to build their brand, right? And so if you're partnering with I'll use regionally for me, like Jackson Purchase and Old Glory are both within a 45-minute drive of me right now. They have the opportunity to sell you a third of their barrels and make some money, and while they still build up the things that they're making to sell inside their store, because revenue streams are really really tough to come by with new make. You can only put out so much White Dog before people, individual consumers, like, I don't want to buy any more White Dog. I want to buy something that's aged, and you got to stay afloat for a while. So thank you for the time. If you've got any closing thoughts or anything you want to say here at the end, but I've really enjoyed the conversation. I've learned a few things. Kudos to you guys and what you're doing.
No, thank you. And thanks for having us along today. But I think it's just to reinforce that, what we do, you're right, we help the distilleries in many ways. We've seen the financial input that we facilitated in real terms, in them employing more people, buying more machinery. But I think importantly, allowing them to age the barrels for longer as well. And that's a benefit that really does carry through to the consumer, in that previously, economics have dictated how long barrels could be aged for at distilleries. Well, it's not just due to CaskX, but a number of companies like ours that allow them to sit on those barrels for longer and be more selective about the what they're putting out there. So we love that. It's a win-win-win. We're happy, our investors are happy because they're making some money, and the distilleries are happy because people who would never normally be sending the money are funneling money through us to them, and that's helping to create employment and, as we said, build machinery and to age barrels for longer as well. So, so far so good.
Yeah, it's definitely a net gain, and I'll leave you with maybe one final thought. If you ever need somebody to go check on any of the stuff you guys got at Jackson Purchase, it's only like a 45-minute drive for me. Give me a buzz. I'll run over there, take care of it for you. No big deal. So,
I've got you.
um,
I've got
what,
you.
once again, Jeremy, thank you for your time. Time is the one thing you can never make more of. I mean, we can make more money. We can make more houses. We can do a lot of things. We can't make more time. And so I appreciate the minutes that you've given me today.
No, thank you, John. It's a pleasure. Hopefully see you soon.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode from the Embellish Pod. If you enjoyed this, please leave me a review on whatever platform you're consuming this on. Leave a comment if possible. Hit me up on social media on TikTok or Instagram using Embellish Pod and give me a follow so you can keep up with what's going on here. I can be found on my website at www.embellishpod.com. There's links, there's accounts, there's contact details, and more there. Thanks for stopping by.